Hi, my name is Stephen Burrow, and I'm here on episode 3 of The Journey today. And today I'd like us to talk about patience, resilience, doing good, making a difference, and consistency. Hope you enjoy the episode. So we're in a business of manufacturing school shoes, and we've got 2 ranges of school shoes, and it's a tough market to break into because it's quite established. There's some heavy hitters in the market, but also the company itself was formed in 2020, but I really only stepped into the space. It was dormant until 2021 when I really stepped into it and kicked some life into it and got it onto the road. And so we're going into our 4th back to school season now. And that's why it's tough, because it's seasonal as well. You've got 3 months to earn 12 months worth of revenue. So the original founder was actually a friend and a colleague of mine, and he had started this business in the background and not really told anyone about it. But as we all caught up in our full-time jobs, he really hadn't done anything with it. And so in the end of 2020, I was retrenched. And at that stage, 47 years old, kids to educate, bills to pay, you've got to do something. So I stepped into that space and literally just started going door to door from shop to shop that was selling school shoes and trying to sell shoes. And the first door I went into, we actually got a 100 pair order. And that's really where it started. That's how the business started. And I think breathing life back into it meant actually getting front and center in front of people, showing them the product, letting them touch and feel the product, and see that although it may look like all the other school shoes on the market, there's something fundamentally different about the product. Okay, interesting, very varied background. I'm actually a teacher by profession. So I actually taught for 4 years, way back in the day. And I left the teaching profession, probably in hindsight, shouldn't have. I loved the career, but I stepped out for the sake of starting a family, getting married, and being able, to afford a lifestyle. And from there, I've been in sales since then, the early 2000s. And predominantly in occupational health and safety space, selling consumable products, and in automotive, selling filtration products predominantly. But my role has always actually been in sales, front and center, and I've traveled a lot. I've got more passports that are full at home than I care to remember, and most countries in Africa, most countries in the Middle East. So I've been very privileged from that perspective, but always in the field of sales. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, no one saw that coming. That was, February 2020, we were still, enjoying life. And then we were told we were going to go into this 3-week lockdown, and months later, we were still doing it. We still worked during that time. And business was still okay at that time. But then, obviously, everything started slowing down. And I was not, by any stretch of the imagination, unique. There were many, many, many people affected by this and businesses that were closed. But it was hard because, you have to reset. You have to start again, effectively. You're in the midst of a situation where there are no jobs. So it's not like you can put your CV out and go and start looking for something else. And this has kind of been bubbling in the background all my life, this desire to do something else. But, when you're in a comfort zone, you're never really going to do anything about it. Well, here was no more comfort zone. You're like the rug pulled out from under you. Time to go and find a job or start something. And that's really what kicked it off. It's always a tough question because the first answer that comes to mind is to say, well, I would have started earlier. That's what I would have done. But in my case, there's a sort of the opposite side of that, and that is that I'm not sure that I was ready earlier. It's almost like I had to literally go on this journey. I had to travel. I had to be exposed to things. I had to bump my head. I had to make mistakes. I had to, mature. There were a lot of things that actually improved my situation and they wouldn't have been there had I not gone through all that. So I would still encourage young people to start the entrepreneurial journey earlier because you have less risk, you have less to lose. But I think for me, there was a ton of basic learning that I had to go through, and grow up really before I was in a position to say, okay, I'm ready. I spent my career building businesses for other people and organizations. That was my job, to travel, business development, set up distribution channels, sell product. Loved my job, but truthfully, there's always this thing inside of you that says there's got to be more than this. I'm built for more. And I think 2020 was that moment. In November, as I said, that the rug gets pulled out from under you. Very fortunate. I walked away amicably. It was just a pure out and out retrenchment. And I had time and space because it's December. First of all, even if you wanted to look for a job, you couldn't. So we planned this, and we said 3 months. We need grace for 3 months. So my daughter lived in their study. We lived in the guest room, and my son actually had a camping cot put up in the kitchen, in a little part of the kitchen. He slept there. And I'll never forget, he asked me when I finished telling him the story. He said to me, "Dad, are we poor?" That was the first question he asked me. Are we poor? I'll never forget that. That was the moment everything changed. It's tough because you've got a 3-month commitment. You've got that period, and I'm sitting there on the patio thinking to myself, well, it's now end of December. I've lost 1 month already. I've got 2 months to go. What on earth am I going to do between now and the end of February to ensure that I'm going to be able to keep the lights on, like physically move out of the space into our own space? What am I going to do? And that's the first thought that comes to me. Yeah, I think it's true for me, but I think true for most people. We spend our entire existence chasing stuff, chasing acquisition, chasing, money, titles, responsibilities, and all that comes with it. But in actual fact, none of those things really sort of hit the mark. Success, when you're chasing money, is a never-ending thing. It's a downward spiral because you're never going to have enough. But when you find that thing that makes you happy and it fulfills you, and meets your basic human need as a human being, man, let me tell you, it's way more gratifying than just money. You need to earn money, make no mistake, but don't make that the purpose, the point of the journey. You still feel like giving up. These days now, I still feel like giving up. You've got to ask the question, is it worth it? But I read a quote by Winston Churchill that said, you can't give up on something that you can't go one day without thinking about. And to me, what got me through that time is there were a couple of things. One is I started networking with a group of like-minded businessmen, entrepreneurs from varied backgrounds and stories. And I realized there were more of us out there, a lot more of us. And we're all in the struggle together, and we've got each other's backs and we help where we can. But if nothing else, they just understood. And so that was key. And I think for me, to work on that was important. The second thing that came to mind was my upbringing came back to me, sort of how I've grown up. I'd been raised in a way to think that like I was destined for more, I'm sure all parents think that of their kids.
Yeah.
So mine weren't unique, but I started believing it. I grew up believing it, and that giving up was never an option, and then I went to a school that also wasn't an option. So I just didn't feel that I was wired that way. I owed it to myself, I owed it to my kids to show up, to be there, to be present, to be the best version of me I could under the circumstances. I exercise every day if I can. So my mission is at least 5 days a week I exercise. Before, just a normal average middle-aged guy, very fortunate to have had a good education, some funded by my parents, others paid for myself, and others covered by company costs. So I'm very fortunate with that. Yeah, just really loving working with people. I think that's why I was in sales, because sales was for me a spin-off from teaching, because I'm always trying to tell people about why they should buy the product, and find out ways of getting them to buy into what I'm talking about. So I love working with people, and that was always the case, being in the field. And I actually got to do a lot of training in my role, sort of technical training as well, which was great. So yeah, just married with kids, chasing my tail like everybody else, trying to carve out a living for myself, really. I mean, I mentioned that, your parents raised your children to believe in yourself, that you have that faith in yourself. But there was something always different about not just what they said, but I grew up, with family members or family friends that kind of would always say, you're going to go far, because I've always been a guy that I like to read. I used to read a hell of a lot. And I think when you read, you're able to participate in conversations quite a lot easier. You've got something to say.
Yeah.
And I think that's another aspect that I think a lot of young people lose out on these days. They don't really read as much as they should, anything. And so their opinions are not normally their own. They normally assimilate with other people's opinions. So I was able to have an opinion and converse. And I just grew up thinking, I can do this, But I think the problem is I coasted on it for far too long. I think when you're in a comfort zone and you just coasting along thinking that, oh, I'm going to achieve. And then one day you wake up and you realize you're in your 40s now. If you're not in the right mindset, it's a disaster. It can spell the end. Really, it can. So I'm grateful because it did allow me the opportunity to start doing the things that I wanted to do. Slowly. When you're an entrepreneur, you're starting a business, you're not having a team of people around you. You don't have customers, you don't have anyone. So it's lonely. You spend a lot of time on your own. And you have to be okay with that. And I think what comes with that as well is the spin-off of that is the struggle with things like anxiety and depression. There's a great book by Malcolm Gladwell called David and Goliath. And he spends that whole book talking about how, as entrepreneurs, as the Davids of the world, we need to start fighting Goliath within the rules of engagement, but according to David's rules, to our strengths. And that book really hit home for me, because that enabled me to see that if you want to fight, if you want to play with the big guys, you need to be creative in how you do it. So I think everything suffers when you focus on one thing only, and so you have to learn. And I think that's why maturity was important for me as well. So you have to be cognizant of this. And so I found myself actually having to schedule things that were important. So my exercise was a non-negotiable. But in a day where I only had 8 hours to do, or 10 hours or 12 hours to do something, I could let that impact on that. So my schedule for my exercise had to be my work schedule. So it became a morning routine, early morning routine. I needed to schedule time for family, for my wife. I needed to schedule time for my own personal development, whether that's, sort of intellectual development or spiritual development. You've got to put those things in. And I'm not naturally a creative person, so creativity is something that you have to work on. But having said that, when you're all things to all people in your business and you're doing everything, you learn quickly, and I think I can't wait for the day where I'm in a position to say, okay, I now have a person that does that, and a person that does that, and then I can take my time and do the things that I'm really much better at.